Howdy, howdy, yeehaw. As the overdone voice in the intro said, welcome. This is Raventail. I'd like to thank our sponsor first, Dusty Saddle Publishing, for their support. You can find them at dspublishingnetwork.com, as well as on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Let them be your home for Western tales. For those of you who love Westerns, these really put you in a place and a time. I'm not necessarily a pure Western fan, but even I like these quite a bit. They really captured the moment of the Wild West. You can also find the social media pages for Raventail Publishing, our namesake, on those same social medias. And me, Jerry Underhill, at JerBear3, that's 3 spelled out. And you can find my books on Amazon, including the most recent, Creature of the Night, which has been ranked somehow in the top 10 for Western horrors and horror short stories on Amazon. A special thanks to my co-writer and friend Charles Ray. He brought the talent to the project, and I know that. Welcome. This is Raventail. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Dusty Saddle Publishing. Again, you can find them at dspublishingnetwork.com. You can find Raventail Publishing at raventailpublishing.com. And me, Jerry Underhill, at JerBear3, that's 3 spelled out. And you can find my books on Amazon. As we have authors on to talk about things that are interesting, we're also going to either read an excerpt from their newest book, something that showcases how that thoughtfulness translates into their fiction, or we'll just read an original short story, usually written by me. In this case, this is an edited, shortened version of the prologue for Creature of the Sea, which released today. Jessica let her mind turn back to the universe it had been pondering. Her gaze wandered to the full moon above, crisp and brilliant against its stark black canvas. The light pollution was minimal here on the Gulf of Alaska. It provided what she thought might approach a more ancient ceiling, one that man had grown up under, and one that had captured its soul on so many long, primal nights. Water lapped at the hole below, the full moon pulling the ocean under itself. They'd left the charming tranquility of the glacier scapes, with their smatterings of floating ice chunks, to ride into a more open ocean wilderness. The specter of the Gulf and its tempestuous demeanor loomed at her back. She preferred to face the coast. She had to face the coast. It was about all her heart could handle. Earth is a puddle. It was the title of some crappy poetry. Or maybe Earth had grown on a leaf that floated on that puddle. That was a better title. It could have even been a crappy first line for crappy poetry. We live on a leaf that floats on a puddle. Or a turtle, she thought, thinking of the Iroquois legend. Oh, deep water, cold and black as the night, she sang in her mind, watching the distant strip of coastal forest that separated water from outer space. It was barely there, faintly lit by the moonlight, but neither the ship's running lights nor the moon did very little to light the water past the first few inches. Beneath that, it was as dark and ungraspable as the black void above. As above, so below. The sea was hiding something down there. It was hiding everything down there, just a finger's length from the surface. It was like the mind in that way. a familiar but foreign place that hid much of itself just a finger's length from the surface. Maybe that's why it's always had such supernatural power over us, she thought. The lost city of Atlantis and the tragedies of the Bermuda Triangle were just examples of modern man writing stories to echo that preternatural awe of what was out there, in the wilds, and within themselves. Fear, sadness, sustenance, wonder, adventure, and the end. Nature, like our self-awareness itself, waves at us with the reminder that there will be an end, and we wave back with stories. She looked down again. She couldn't see it, but she could hear where the gulf continued slipping endlessly and boisterously along the hull far below, occasionally slapping at its fresh white sheen and pushing briny breeze to wrap more numbingly around her face. She closed her eyes against the new breeze. This one was thankfully shorter and lighter. She opened her eyes and froze, startled. Wine spilt from her glass. "Did you see that?" she asked Mary. But even as she did, there was nothing to see. A green light had flashed, strobing rapidly before disappearing again. What? There was a light in the water. There had been a body. A face. "Did you see her?" "What?" "Man overboard!" Jessica yelled toward the bar. "Where's the floating donuts?" "Jess," Mary began. A loud thud against the far side of the hull, cutting her off. They spun. The people at the bar had heard it too. Another followed, this time accompanied by the sound of water splashing back to the sea. Another thud. The floor trembled with the impact. A loud squelch and a vibrating, grinding sound, like twisting a heel on the bathtub floor. Jessica ran for the bar. Ryan, her husband, met her halfway, grabbing her hand with wide eyes and turning for Matt. Mary was next to them, yelling across the bar to where she saw Matt's head bobbing amidst the sea of startled faces. "Matt!" Ryan yelled, pulling Jessica by the hand. "We hit a boat," Jessica guessed, her mind scrambling. "Could that sink us?" Mary asked shrilly. But then Matt was running back from the far railing, his face ashen white and his lips pulled back in horror. "Matt!" Ryan yelled again, panic lacing his voice. The front of the ship suddenly sprang out of the water, the shriek of metal and the boom of resounding impact ringing through Jessica's ears as she was thrown to her back, toppling end over end to smash amongst a pile of chairs and humans. Even as they were falling backward, the bow of the ship still rising, she felt her body sliding portside. She grabbed at Ryan's pant leg as she slipped along the floor, impotently scraping her fingernails along the polished wood. "Ryan!" she screamed as she stabbed a hand toward his torso. He reached down to her with his free hand, his other white-knuckled around a table leg. The boat lurched violently, rotating with the force of some irresistible tug. The momentum was too much for the engineering. Numb and dry from the cold, her hand slipped from his as the deck pitched 90 degrees to the sea below. His eyes ripped open in panic as his fingers grabbed at air. She was already falling. Countless others fell at her sides. She held her breath. She had time to see others in the water as her body twisted over, but then she struck the surface, 1,000 knives carving into her organs. An involuntary gasp tore at her chest, the cold deadening her lungs. She splashed and kicked, fighting for the surface, but her heavy clothes dragged her underneath. She screamed, wasting her last instant of air, cursing herself even as her mind drowned in furious panic. She could see the ship's lights through the water, mesmerized for a moment as they continued to topple toward her. "Swim!" She fought at her coat, managing to rip herself free and then tearing her shoes off. "Swim!" she thought again. It wasn't going to be fast enough. She couldn't help but pull for the surface. Her lungs were on fire. Her eyes were on fire. She had to shut them against the sting. Somehow she got to the surface. Breath wouldn't come. She was too cold, frozen to the spine. Her teeth chattered, minuscule currents of air and water fighting each other to slide down her throat. A mouthful suddenly won out and she coughed, fighting for the surface and spitting salty ocean from her mouth. "Ah!" she screamed, seeing the monstrous silhouette wrapping itself over the top deck. Its head was still underwater, but the legs were dark and shimmering wet. Each was as thick as a locomotive. Each was as long out of the water as a passenger car. 1,000 screams rent the air. Fighting herself, she shoved under and opened her eyes, squirming spastically back for the surface at the sight, a foreground of 100 squid undulating their way through the depths toward the now submerged running lights. Worse than their scrambling silhouettes was the behemoth they flocked toward, a monster whose legs stretched long enough into the deep that she couldn't see where they met body or head. More splashes rained all about the surface, as the deck crawled toward the sea, spiking down with a final punctuating dive before bobbing back. "Ryan!" she yelled, dragging back under the surface by her saturated clothes. Okay. Howdy, Charlie. Charlie is an author, of course. He's also the chair of the Africa program and trustee at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He was the U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia and the Republic of Zimbabwe, appointed by Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, respectively. I'm lucky to get to work and play with him. Hi, Charlie. Did I miss anything there?
Hey, how's it going? How's it going?
I'm doing all right. It's early enough that I've had a few cups of coffee, but haven't had too much.
You should try my morning routine.
But don't tell me tea.
I get up and oh no, not tea. No, I get up in the morning. I make a cup of coffee and I throw half a cup of protein powder and some ghee butter in it, and that's my breakfast.
Really? My wife
Yep.
bought some ghee butter, and I have not thought about putting it in coffee with some protein powder. You got all that wisdom, man.
I tell you, well, when you get to be a certain age, you need to put lightness on your joints, which means getting heaviness off your belly. And believe it or not, drinking fat with your coffee in the morning instead of eating breakfast will do it.
You had me at drinking fat, so I'll roll with that.
Well, that's what ghee butter is, just pure fat.
Oh, forgive me, I forgot to mention a little Google magic told me that you served in Vietnam and were awarded with 2 Bronze Stars, so I didn't know that about you. That's really cool, man.
Oh, yeah. Well, I actually have had a few jobs now and then, but I spent most of my life in government.
Well, thank you for that. So we've written a couple books together now. We've written Creature of the Night and now Creature of the Sea, which was released, I believe, earlier today.
Yep.
Very excited about this new one. I think it's going to be pretty good. It focuses on mermaids, and the first one, Creature of the Night, focuses on werewolf.
Yep.
In my Western horror stories, The Watching Woods, I'm not sure if you've ever taken a look at it. The story loosely features the mythology of the Nez Perce and other Pacific Northwest tribes. Similarly, what we've done in our 2 books together is probe at that relationship between nature and fear, at what happens in our psyche at the borders around our encampments, around our castles, our villages, our cities, etc., at the border separating a world of order, human order, from the wilds beyond. Historically, obviously, that's where myths and mythology are born, in that soft space between the two, as if perception of that beyond is observed and then explained through the prism of that filmy bubble we cast around us. And it probably starts with death, right? The greatest of the wild beyonds that we can anticipate, that we can see. And it permeates down to all of nature, where the creatures and dangers are themselves vessels of death, and life.
Yeah.
We know where the landscape and creatures are alive with personalities, agency, a central role in the development of all that is. And what's most interesting to me is that, returning to this idea of a bubble that we perceive things through, in this case, the machinery of our brains, we probably experience that relationship uniquely among all the creatures on Earth. We see the world in the context of utility and threat as other animals do, but simultaneously, because of this ultimate capacity of our minds, we experience depth and meaning, and we feel this innate connection to the great sea of unknown eternal, for the lack of a better term for it, or maybe just for a more universal term for it. And what I'm most excited about talking with you is, as a man with so much experience around the world, you must have experiences where this is alive today. We think about this experience with like magic as being like this medieval sense of, oh, there's unicorns and dragons in the forest, right? Or with Native American mythology. But you've been in places where the relationship with nature is probably more intimate and less separate than what we experience in the United States. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that there are cultures still where people are much closer to what we would call nature. I think that's probably one of the biggest deficiencies in our culture is that we've become so mechanized and so automated that we've lost track of what nature brings to us and how much nature actually shapes us. In a way, though, that's probably good for us as horror writers because I think people unconsciously or subconsciously realize what's missing, and they make up for it by reading, these stories where we play on these hidden fears that people have. But yeah, I lived in places where people still believe in that border, if you will, between the spiritual world and the physical world is a lot more porous than we accept. Just as an example, I lived in a country, I won't name it because I still have friends there, but where they believe in spirits very strongly, and there was an incident. Oh, I guess I'd been there about a year or two when the guard on my housing compound, one morning I walked out and the guards were laughing and I asked them why. And they said they caught a thief in the neighborhood. This guy, they saw him climbing over a fence as naked as a jaybird, covered in white paint. And when the guards ran after him, at first he stopped and he looked shocked because he was supposed to be invisible. And they described chasing this naked guy painted white through about 5 backyards before they finally drug him down. And the poor guy was absolutely devastated because the witch doctor who sold him the paint sold him a bad batch of paint. He shouldn't have been seen. And this is an everyday occurrence in some countries. I worked in one country where a very senior government official, I won't even identify his position because if I did, half the people listening would know, uh, smeared himself with animal fat before high-level meetings because it gave him power. So, you have that, and to us, I know that sounds sort of silly, but basically, if you the comparable analogy is people who believe a lot of these weird conspiracy theories that float around the internet. When people strongly believe things, that's real to them. And you one thing I've learned in 50 years of traveling around the world is we don't know it all, and so I take everything that I'm told or I hear with a little bit of skepticism, but I don't outright reject it because you never know.
I think that's a brilliant insight or a brilliant point, just that reality is subjective. And
Yeah.
and we know that, but some of these examples, bring that to light. That doesn't necessarily mean that it becomes objective, right? That man wasn't actually invisible, but in some
No.
ways, his experience with whatever mythology or cultural beliefs that came from does in very real ways affect his day-to-day reality, right?
Oh yeah, and the fact that he believes it, I mean, I've seen people because of their beliefs able to withstand trauma that for people who don't believe, becomes unbearable because they don't have that spiritual belief to reach out to. In a warped sense, I mean, this belief in the supernatural is not really that much different from organized religion.
Yeah, I was about to say that, in the sense that it turns this abstract feeling of a connection into something that you can structure and harness, like you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, it gives you it's a way of coping with the things that are otherwise unexplained.
What do you think happens for that man um, after he's caught? What do you think happens to him regarding his belief in that witch doctor and in that magic?
Well, he would probably, and I didn't follow up on it, so I can't say for sure, but from my other experiences in places where, this type of culture exists, is he would go and complain that he got a bad batch. It's like when a person goes to a fortune teller, and the fortune teller says, you're going to come into money, and if they leave and the next day they haven't come into money, they go in and they complain, and the fortune teller says, well, I didn't tell you when. you know uh, I think the basic belief is not destroyed. There's just that momentary, you misled me, or and the really good fortune tellers have ways. I actually knew, in a couple of countries where I worked, I actually knew people who were shamans, and some of them were a bit candid. They admit that, they're working on feelings too, and that sometimes these things, interpretations vary. You say something and one person interprets it one way and another person interprets it another way, and yeah, that's how successful con men work too. Have a story, have an explanation for everything. But I doubt if that man surrendered his total belief in it. I mean, that's you don't you don't spend a life immersed in a cultural belief and then suddenly just shuck it off in a day.
Particularly since it's easier, like you said, for the shaman to provide some interpretation for why it failed, or even just to deflect it on this man. In some way
Mm-hmm.
he failed.
Yeah, you didn't paint it. You didn't paint properly, or you didn't do it at the right time of day. I mean, no, there's
Or
always.
even just that he's lived a life that means that the supernatural has abandoned him in some sense. You see parallels of that obviously with the bubonic plague. The response of churches, Christianity and Jewish and Muslim, in thinking that they've sinned. They failed in some way, and therefore the magic that was protecting them from disease, because there was no better explanation at that time.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, we've seen that just during the pandemic. How many times have you seen news stories about certain religious sects saying, the pandemic's the will of God, so there's nothing we can do about it. That's been with us since, I think, caveman days, and I don't think it'll ever go away. I don't know that the human brain can function any other way.
You're right, and there's so much good there too. So it's a weird yin and yang, right? Like within the heart of darkness is the citadel of light, and vice versa.
You can't have dark without light, and vice versa.
I guess just trying to control it and filter it is our own process as we get older, just as individuals and as families and as groups.
Right. That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny though how powerful, even for the rational mind, this experience with nature can be. When I first started hiking, I mean, I still hate camping, despite loving hiking. But when I first started hiking, probably because I live in Florida, the mosquitoes are just terrible. And I always love snow camping, but I don't get many opportunities to do it. But some of my earliest hiking experiences were, long 18, 20-mile hikes where it's basically overnight because, like I said, we're not camping. Yeah. And the idea that the sense that there are things around you in these pine flatwoods, right where the saw palmettos are 5 feet tall, you can't really see over them, you can't see through them. The idea that there's Bigfoot, skunk ape, even velociraptors, as silly as it seems in the moment, like it feels so real.
Oh, tell me about it.
And whenever I have those experiences, it connects me to this experience that we have as a species with mythology. And I remember one time we were walking and my brother screamed this unholy sound that I could never replicate and I could never forget, because it came from something in him that was primal. And I thought for sure in the moment that he died, but it was just that a bird had kind of flown out of the saw palmetto. And
scared him.
Right, but it was there, right? Like he was experiencing, this is a tough guy, but he was experiencing this relationship with nature that's so ancient for us that that bird could have been anything.
I know. I can tell you a story I did back in 1969. I was in Panama. We used to have back when the U.S. controlled the Canal Zone, we had a military base down there that provided jungle survival training for the Army, well, for the whole services. And I went to the 2-week jungle school, and I remember the first night camp we did, they had told us you sleep in a hammock strung between the trees with fully dressed because it's a tactical thing and you have to be ready to move in a moment's notice. And they told everyone, tie your boots snugly so the laces don't flap loose, because if they flap loose, they roll over your skin. Strange things can happen. Well, we had one guy who ignored it. And sure enough, middle of the night, about midnight, there's this piercing scream, the sound of feet hitting the soft jungle, and then feet running, and then a thud and a scream when he ran into a needle pine because his bootlaces came loose and rolled down his leg, and he thought a snake was on his leg. He was sure he was about to die. And he almost did, because he was impaled on that pine tree from his neck to his crotch.
Talk about subjective reality becoming objective reality.
Yes.
That's funny. I mean, if you extrapolate this experience in fear of nature, in my example or in your example there, you realize how necessary our belief in magic is for us to coexist with the natural world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And because it is scary, and in some senses we don't belong anymore physically.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, in a sense, I mean, I think sometimes that our ability to sort of be aware of our own mortality makes us the outlier species on the planet.
Well, that's what's, I think maybe some of the most interesting mythology for me is of the sea, and that's why I was so excited to write that Creature of the Sea book with you.
The marriage between the sea and the land, and what I liked about it as we were working through it is leaving certain things still unknown. That sort of sucks the reader in and excites their minds. What's happening, and that's the essence, I think, of a good thriller. Is you don't tell people everything. You leave a little bit dangling in the dark, make them wonder what's out there.
And the ocean is the perfect embodiment of that, in that we can't see through it. We can't visit most of it. So much of it is uncharted and impossible to know.
And what you can see is scary. I remember my first time on the ocean back in the 60s. You get out of sight of land, and that's an awesome, especially in the North Atlantic in the winter. Nothing but black sea all around you as far as you could see is scary, totally scary.
Charlie, I've been lucky enough to never be at sea. And
Really?
I'm looking to continue that on, but I have a hard time just walking by, the beach at night, or the intercoastal. I have a hard time seeing. I saw this video yesterday of, I think it was in Alaska, the water underneath the glacier.
Yeah.
And it was just black as all dark mystery. And it shook me to my bones. And that kind of a thing is why I think we chose to base Creature of the Sea in Alaska.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I mean that's sort of the last. Well, the Antarctic is the last frontier, but Alaska is still one of the frontiers. I mean, we know so little about that state that it amazes me. I've been there a couple of times, and it's amazing that that's part of the United States, and it's like this wild frontier, even nowadays.
Well, Charlie, thanks for your time here, man. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I'm just I'm keeping my fingers crossed that Creature of the Sea will join Night Creature in the upper ranks of popularity for readers out there, and that everyone will read and enjoy it.
We should
And
mention that Creature of the Night has hovered in the top 10 for Western horrors and horror short stories for pretty much its entire existence now.
yes, and I think it was up at number 17 or something today, and it's gotten as high as number 7. And I'm hoping it won't go down until we get the sequel out, which we, by the way, are now working on.
Yeah, it should be out by the end of the summer for anybody
Yeah,
who liked the first one. Well, Charlie, I knew you're the man just from writing with you, but now, given everything else I know about you on account of Google, I know it more. So thank you,
thanks.
and
Great.
I look forward to keep writing with you.
Been fun. Talk to you later.